Are live. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon or good evening around the world. A warm welcome. We have a great pleasure to share with you a webinar today about the impact on the pandemic on your workforce, specifically how to manage your startup in the new normal. It is my great honor to moderate this event and wanted to highlight that it was based on the insights we gathered during our global survey, which highlighted the concerns our members have regarding the impact of the pandemic on the entrepreneurship ecosystem and specifically on their teams, as well as a keen interest to learn how to adapt their businesses in the new normal, given that we have such a dynamic environment that we're dealing with. To start us off, we will have welcome remarks from Professor Inderjit Singh, President of the WPF Global Startup Committee, followed by our keynote speaker, Tony Maroney. And then we will invite our distinguished panel guest speakers to share their insights during a roundtable discussion. As always, we will finish with Q&A session and are looking forward to receiving all your questions via the chat function. And now it is my great honor to invite Professor Singh to share his welcome remarks.
Thank you, Ingrid. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And I want to thank Ingrid for organizing this. She's putting a lot of effort to organize this panel discussion on this very important topic. As Ingrid mentioned, in May last year, when the pandemic had hit all around the world and businesses, especially startups, saw a significant impact on their business, we did a survey to understand the impact and what kind of help our community, startup community needed. And there were three major things that we uncovered during that survey. First was, of course, like all the time in any big disruption, money. That our startups were running out of money, and they told us that what was one of the number one problem that they faced, funding their businesses. And some of them indicated to us that they had just 3 to 6 months of money left, unless they could raise some or the business comes back. So demand had dropped so much, and they were affected quite significantly. The second issue that our startups were concerned about was the new normal was coming, and they needed to pivot their business and to transform their business models. And so that was the second big thing that our startups told us. And the third one was on how to manage their startups in this new normal, particularly with respect to the manpower HR issues. So what we did was a post survey, the insights that we got. We looked also at the global surveys that were done by many organizations, also confirmed what we found. We actually have been organizing over the past few months such roundtables and panel discussions to address these three issues. So the first one we had was on financing and funding a startup in this new normal. And second webinar and panel discussion that we had was on pivoting and business transformation. And this is a final leg of what we wanted to do to give back to the community based on what they told us. So I'm so happy to see that we have got a very distinguished panel here, keynote by Tony, and then in the discussion, Tracy, Nikki, Nikhil, and Mary, all of them are experts in their field. I want to thank you for joining us, and I hope that this is a fruitful session. And once again, Ingrid, thank you for hosting this. Back to you.
Thank you. And now it is my great honor to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Tony Maroney. And the topic of the keynote is also a direct consequence of the survey. Most of our respondents indicated that digital transformation, the importance of digital literacy and digital fluency is very high on their agenda. Actually, it was higher than 90%. I've never even seen in a survey something at 90%. So that's why we thought it would be good to start us off today with understanding the digital transformation impact on the global workforce. Tony is the founder and managing partner of Beta Digital, a specialist strategy and digital transformation advisory firm. So who else would be better suited to provide this keynote? Additionally, he's co-founder of the Digital Transformation Lab, a think tank comprising experts from industry, academia, and consulting. Tony is also the program director for digital leadership at the Irish Management Institute and the lecturer on digital business and digital strategy. His career has spanned both industry and consulting across the world, and he specializes in strategy, business model innovation, digital transformation, change management, and governance. And I could go on and on for about a week with all his biography, but it's my great honor now to introduce to you and pass the virtual floor. Tony Maroney.
Thank you, Ingrid, and hello, everyone. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's my great pleasure to be here with you today to share my thoughts on digital transformation. As the professor said, without doubt, digital transformation is now center stage, practically in every organization in both the private and public sector alike. Events of the past year have burdened boards of directors, government officials, leadership teams, and investors with the realization that we should have been further progressed in terms of digital transformation. Clearly, organizations that were more digitally advanced going into the COVID-19 crisis have performed better. Some, in fact, have thrived, including notable successful startups who readily embrace change to successfully deliver for customers at a time of great upheaval. Equally, many organizations have floundered as analog business models became unstuck. A real sense of panic was evident over the last 12 months as business leaders scrambled to respond to a crisis, and in many instances, sought to accelerate their digital transformation plans. I must tell you, however, that I become deeply worried when I see headlines purporting that years of digital transformation has been achieved in months, and there have been many such headlines. Many organizations think they have digitally transformed in the past year. In reality, most have merely responded to the crisis, and in the process, utilize readily available digital tools to keep their business open and to keep their employees and customers safe. As business leaders, you know that changing mindsets and culture takes a lot more than this. So what seems to be the problem with digital transformation? A major issue is that digital transformation is not defined. I am confident that if I asked everyone attending here today to define digital transformation, that I would receive a huge and diverse range of answers. I'm equally confident that if I was to ask any board or directors, or indeed any executive leadership team for their definition of digital transformation, that the results would be no different. In fact, this lack of definition creates a lot of ambiguity and misconceptions in most organizations. In my own experience, there are usually big gaps in terms of what people think and understand by digital transformation. And more often than not, these differences remain unspoken. So it begs the question, if we haven't defined digital transformation, but yet we are doing digital transformation, should we be surprised by the many articles that suggest that upwards of 70% of digital transformations fail? Interesting thought. Absent definition, many organizations seek meaning from the term digital transformation itself. Unfortunately, the main emphasis goes on the word digital, with very little and sometimes no emphasis on the word transformation. The reality, of course, is that digital transformation is all about transformation. It just so happens that we're using digital tools and technologies to underpin, accelerate, and or support the development of new business models. And this is critically important because if all we do is change the technology, nothing changes bar some of the technology. And that's not changing an organization. So, admittedly, startups can have an inherent advantage. And the immediate response is, yeah, well, startups succeed because they don't have legacy technology. And while this may confer certain advantages, it's not the real reason why startups succeed in a digital business world. Startups succeed because they are clear about their purpose. This drives their strategy and it underpins their culture. Many are digital by design, run by digital natives. And as we know, many have already achieved unicorn status. These new competitors design their business models from the customer perspective. Their emphasis on truly understanding the customer's journey and on using data to derive insights about what is important and when for their customers. They're equally designed to minimize customer pain points, including end-to-end processes, thereby eliminating handoffs and critically avoiding the silos, all too prevalent in incumbent organizations. In many respects, these startups are completely changing the nature of business. They are also absolutely redefining customer experience. The net result is that consumer expectations are now evolving more quickly than we have ever seen. Hyper-connected consumers are also being educated to demand exceptional customer service. The difficulty for most organizations has been an inability to keep pace with the level of change, which, if anything, has accelerated in the past 9 months, which of course brings us back to the full circle to the question of digital transformation. The unprecedented level of change is why practically every organization in the world is now focused on digital transformation. But are they truly transforming? Or is this just a response and reaction to a crisis? How much has happened in the past year that is real, purposeful strategy? I believe far too many firms have no real sense of purpose. Some, in fact, think their purpose is to make money. And while this can be a good outcome, it's not the reason their organization exists. And herein lies the problem. By comparison to a startup is clear about why it exists. It understands its market. It understands its customers and their needs. Typically, it obsesses about its service offering, and it strives to build their business in a manner that creates competitive advantage and delivers on its ambition. So that's great, but over time, startups, the successful ones, start to grow. And often the leadership changes, and with this, the emphasis shifts from customer intimacy and innovation to operational excellence. And while it's desirable that firms are really good at what they do, in isolation, it can lead to a disconnect with the market, their customers, and their customers' changing needs. In essence, modern day organizations need to continuously reinvent and be operationally excellent in parallel. Either or will not survive. This is particularly important, more so than ever, as the advancements in digital and mobile technologies are relentless and exponential. The alternative, the proverbial ivory tower, becomes ripe for disruption. To avoid this fate, we must be clear on our organization's purpose, its vision, its mission, and its values. These are the foundation blocks of digital transformation. In fact, it is domino number one. Together, they provide clarity about why an organization exists. They inform the leadership about how they need to transform the organization, which in turn guides what they should do. To paraphrase Simon Sinek, the most effective leaders always start with the heart first and then the mind. And therefore, they always start with why. All too often, organizations start digital transformation with a vague understanding of their purpose. Instead, they rush to isolated point solutions where power, domain expertise, or recency factors often win the day. But this is not strategy. How often have we seen organizations invest in technologies, data, customer relation systems, touch points, etc., and yet fail to be competitive or meet their customers' needs? I would say all too often. But it doesn't have to be this way. To succeed, we need to rethink our approach to digital transformation and recognize that digital impacts the whole organization. Critically, digital transformation is as much about culture and mindset as it is about technology. In this regard, I can't emphasize enough that being clear on purpose enables us to be clear on strategy. This informs our plan for the organization in terms of its culture, its structure, and its skills. It also informs our infrastructure, our processes, our data and analytics, as well as our value proposition, our revenue model, our touch points, and our customer relationships. All of these are important, as is the sequencing. Suffice to say, without real clarity of purpose, a coherent strategy, and an enabling culture, that digital transformation efforts will be suboptimal at best. And this is why leadership is so critical. Leadership must own digital transformation. It can't be delegated. Yet, far too often, leadership teams often try to pin digital transformation on someone in their organization. Invariably, this person doesn't have the mandate nor the budget to change the organization. They are de facto the digital alibi. To succeed, leadership must own and be seen to collectively own digital transformation. It's not a one-off presentation to the organization. It's a constant that changes how they lead, and importantly, how they govern the organization. It must be absolutely clear to management, employees, and other key stakeholders that the organization is fully committed to a clearly articulated digital transformation journey. It must be the organization's North Star. Equally important, digital transformation is not a separate strategy. Digital is integral to strategy. We are not running two organizations, so why should we have a strategy and a separate digital strategy? Is it not the one organization? Another important consideration is to consider our starting point. Where are we today? And what is our direction of travel? To determine our starting point, we should assess our organization's level of digital maturity. And by this, I mean, how far has the organization progressed relative to its environment on its digital transformation journey? In reality, however, most organizations don't measure digital maturity. When asked, digital maturity is perceived through the lens of the responder, through their own personal level of digital maturity. And if that's at senior level, that can be quite low. For example, if a board of directors or leadership team have limited knowledge or understanding of digital, often they perceive their organization to be more digitally mature than it actually is. A more realistic view might be offered by younger digital native employees. So let's involve them. Let's make them part of the solution. Equally, we need to consider our digital maturity in the context of our competitors and the marketplace. If our competitors are more digitally mature, and that's what our customers want, well, I would suggest we have a real problem. If our customers are more digitally mature and neither us nor our competitors can meet their needs, well, your market is ripe for disruption, and watch the new startups come in and take your business. By taking time to understand our digital maturity, we should have a good idea about the relative position of our organization and the challenges that we will face with digital transformation. But it's not enough. We also need to consider the medium term. We need to assess the many potential waves of change which will shape the world of tomorrow. But remember, we can't do everything. So we need to find a way to determine which waves will fundamentally impact our business, threaten our survival, or preferably enable us to thrive. Armed with these insights, we can now start to develop a meaningful digital transformation plan. Or, if we are a startup, our plan to disrupt the market. So back to the question, what is digital transformation? I define transformation as the proactive adaptations that an organization makes to be competitive in a digitalized world. However you define digital transformation, the most important thing is that it is widely understood and that it facilitates real engagement, ownership, and commitment throughout your organization. Be cognizant that in reality, digital transformation is more of a journey than a final destination. Our world and business environment continues to change. Having said that, the direction of travel must be clear. To quote Lewis Carroll from the classic story of Alice in Wonderland, if you don't know where you are going, any road will get you there. So in conclusion, let's be clear on the purpose of our organization. Let's understand how we need to transform our business. Let's understand the boundless potential presented by mobile and digital technologies, and let's plan accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Wonderful keynote. I really appreciate, and I'm sure all our audience enjoyed all the insights you mentioned. I particularly like the digital alibi. I think I'm gonna copy that. So now I really think this was a great way to set the stage for our panel. It is my pleasure to briefly introduce our distinguished guests for the virtual discussion. I will not be able to do justice to their extensive biography, so I will just mention a few highlights. Please forgive me that I had to trim them, but otherwise we would occupy the whole event with your illustrious careers. So first, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Tracy Levine. She is a Forbes Coach Council member, chair, and CEO of Advantage Talent. Tracy is also a trusted executive coach to what the World Economic Forum refers to as system leaders. She's known as a culture and engagement scientist, and her insights have been featured by numerous prestigious media channels. Only if I list those, we would take about 15 minutes. Tracy is also an accomplished author, and her most recent work is focused exactly on today's topic, how to future-proof your workforce. And she is known as an expert in driving employee engagement by combining best marketing practices, data analytics, and the use of disruptive technologies. Thank you for joining us. The next panelist, it's also my great honor to introduce Mary. Mary McNeese Rhodes Scholar, sits on the board of the Imperial Business School and serves on McKinsey's Shareholders Council, the Global Governance Board, where she sits on both of the People's Committee and the M&A Committee. She co-leads the organization practice globally and is the co-author of Leading Organizations, 10 Timeless Truths, another important book that I strongly recommend for everybody to read. For more than 20 years, she has assisted global business leaders during their important business transformations, change management, top team alignment, and performance improvement efforts. She is also the co-founder of the McKinsey Women's Initiative in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, Women as Leaders Program, and Remarkable Women's Program. Her research work on leadership also addresses the behavioral dynamics in operational and management of teams. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Ingrid.
Welcome. And last but not least, we have Nikhil Agarwal, our very own WBF High Commissioner from India. He holds twin charge of CEO First. He has been a distinguished speaker all over the world and lecturer at numerous universities. He has founded businesses and advises firms on strategic matters over the past 20 years. His interviews and his work have been extensively covered in international media. He has served as a high-level advisor to the United Nations Global Alliance on ICT and Development. He has traveled extensively around the world and has worked with global institutions, corporations, and multinationals. Thank you for joining us today. It's a great honor to have you at this panel. And now, I would like to kick our panel off with a broader question, and I hope all of you can weigh in. Maybe we'll start with Nikhil. From a global workforce perspective and your good pulse that you have on the entrepreneurship ecosystem, what do you think are the most significant changes we have witnessed after this pandemic on the global workforce?
Thank you, Ingrid, and I acknowledge the distinguished panel and the audience that we have today. The topic today was new normal, and something which I would say a problem with this term. I'll tell you what is my problem. My problem is that the new normal was yesterday. This is the normal that we are in today. There is nothing new about it. We have to wake up and we have to see that all pre-COVID, like I absolutely, pardon me my language, but I absolutely hate when the Economic Times or Financial Express wrote these articles about the pre-COVID level. There is nothing, there is no more pre-COVID level, is all history. It's all gone. The businesses which were flourishing that time are all either wind up. So I was reading an article recently, 34 airlines have filed for bankruptcy. So what will be the new business opportunities that will be there? What will be the future business opportunity? We have to stop talking about the new normal. We have to talk about the current normal, how we wish to survive. So it is very easy to say when we are absolutely grateful by the administrations across the world including United States, when they say $1.9 trillion money will pump in. Government of India is doing something similar. Singapore is doing similar. UK is doing similar. But somebody has to pay for it. And most likely you and me will pay for it. The businesses have to pay for it. And the people have to pay it for it a very, very long time. So I think it's time for us to buckle up and start working on the business model that will work in the next 6 months, that will work in next 2 years or 5 years time. Thankfully, because of the pandemic, there is a more respect for scientists and innovators that has come in. Earlier, we were on the bottom of the pyramid. Like everybody was on the top, like starting with the religious figures, then the politicians, then the billionaires, trillionaires. The last, there are few professors who will agree with me. The last were the scientists and innovators. I think the pandemic has made the people realize that we should be on the top of the pyramid. We should not be on the bottom of the pyramid. The another important point, what I have seen in the last few months, is that is a tremendous uptick for startups that has started happening. Within India itself, there are 18,000 new startups have registered. There could be various reasons that people are without jobs, or people are suddenly finding opportunities to work on new business model. Both the ways. That research we will get to know in few months' time. But there is a startup ecosystem which is again flourishing. 2 days back, the Indian Prime Minister announced almost $200 million new fund to fund startups at the seed level. In India, that was not the case earlier, but now this is happening. There is $1 billion fund which has been announced 4 weeks back to set up the Center for Artificial Intelligence in some of the top universities across the country. So those investments, and from the government side, they are certainly investing a lot from the infrastructure, certainly investing a lot to provide support and subsidies for the businesses which are struggling. But at the same time, the investment is coming in the startup innovation and entrepreneurship. That is a positive way. So I'll just end my opening remark. What I would want to say here is that we need to start working on the models which will work for us immediately. We should not think of a very long future, because the emergence of the business ideas and models will keep on happening. Nobody knows. What we need is businesses to survive right away. I can tell you a very small story. So during the lockdown, so the people were not buying the slippers. The people are not buying the t-shirts or sweaters. So what, I live in a high-rise society in New Delhi, in one of the New Delhi suburbs. So what the businesses started doing, they started bringing the vans and start hosting them here. People were not needing the slippers or shirts or something, but when they actually look at these vans selling products, they have gone outside and done the impulse buying. They may not be going to the big malls or shopping complexes, but people have still are willing to fund something. I was speaking to one of my friend this afternoon who is in near Milton Keynes in UK. He set up a restaurant in the lockdown time. In the last 7 months time, the whole restaurant was is called Skylight, was open up only for a month, and they are giving a run to Starbucks and Costa Coffee because they were able to redevelop their business model in a different way. So that is something phenomenal happening, and I am very keen to hear the other stories as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mary, I was hoping you can share some of your global insights. You work with so many organizations across the world. Can you give us your perspective?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've been working on with McKinsey Global Institute, which is our private think tank, is actually research on how the future of work is developing, and in particular, how COVID has impacted the future of work. And I'll just touch briefly on the 5 major trends. And I actually won't spend a lot of time on the digital transformation because Tony did that brilliantly. But if I touch on the 4 others, the first major shift that we're seeing is actually a continued and an acceleration of automation and AI. I think what we've seen with the pandemic is it's actually propelled faster adoption of automation and AI, especially in work areas that have high physical proximity, as businesses are trying to reduce workplace density and create more contactless customer interactions and so on. So we're seeing this happening across production sites, warehouses, retail, food, accommodation, office jobs, a massive acceleration of automation and AI. So that's the first major shift that we're seeing. The second is the growth in e-commerce. And we've seen some really dramatic shifts in patterns of consumption and demand, right? So we're seeing, e-commerce, virtual transactions soaring. And by the way, that does have some implications in terms of actually decimating low-skill jobs in retail and food service and shifting employment from hourly wage jobs to gig work and so on. But what we've seen in countries like China and India and the United States and the UK and France and Germany and Spain is actually the growth of e-commerce in 2020 is equivalent to the previous 3 to 5 years combined, right? So massive growth in e-commerce. The third major shift that we're seeing is, of course, a radical shift in remote working. Now, we need to remember that not all jobs can be done remotely. We estimate between 20 and 25% of all work can be done under hybrid remote working models, which, by the way, is 4 times the amount of remote work that was done before the pandemic. But we are seeing a radical shift towards remote working with big implications around, for public transportation, for commercial real estate, for urban centers. We're seeing movement of workers outside of urban centers into suburbs and smaller cities. And what we're seeing is that, for those employees who can work remotely, about 80% would like to keep some form of remote or hybrid working. Only about 10% want to go back fully to the pre-crisis model, right? And so companies are going to need to think through that. So this radical shift in remote working is a third major trend. And then the fourth one is a huge disruption, of course, to any work that requires physical proximity, right? So occupations that are human interaction intensive, that have lots of physical proximity, where on-site work is required, have obviously been massively disrupted. And that's where we see the greatest change in where work is getting done now and where it will continue to get done post-pandemic. Now, as you think about these different trends, digitization, automation, e-commerce, and so on, some of them are just continuation, or, we would argue acceleration of what we had seen before. Some of these trends we may see a bounce back as the vaccines come through, and hopefully as we get to a post-pandemic situation. But we suspect that whatever we end up with is still going to be massively different from where we started, right? So, and of course, this all has enormous implications in terms of the workforce. And we had already shown the dramatic shifts that were happening, and in particular, towards more technological skills, more advanced cognitive skills, more social and negotiation, communication, the deeply human skills. But it also means that there's going to be less and less demand for people with basic cognitive skills. Anything that is repetitive, manual, or physical skills are increasingly being displaced. And so one of the effects of all of this is that actually 3/4 of the workers that are affected by these trends don't have a college degree, and more than half are women. So it tends to affect more heavily more vulnerable workers and vulnerable populations. And that's something that I think we as a society, as a broader ecosystem with public sector, private sector, obviously with the universities and academics, will need to address. But those are some of the big macro level shifts that we're seeing.
Thank you. Great summary and overview. Tracy, would you like to add your insights and experience over these past few months, what you have observed?
Yes, I'm in the middle of the Innovation Center in Atlanta and FinTech. So I'm going to speak to FinTech because I think that industry in the startup realm has grown the most in the last year. And the reason why it's grown the most is we're seeing startups change the way they fund. And what has been very interesting when you look at that is when they can't find money. And when employees can't find money, when corporations and startups can't find money, they have to find alternate ways that are not the traditional channels. So you've seen a growth in the 18 to 34-year-old group with the startups using cryptocurrencies because they don't have access to traditional money. And you're seeing a huge startup ecosystem starting up on colleges for self-funding outside of private equity, outside of venture capital, particularly at the most technical colleges. And you're seeing a growth even for technology companies into the what I call GoFundMe Kickstarter group, which used to be more of I have something really cool, a cool product to do. And so you're seeing this whole shift in the way people go find money. They're not waiting for the venture capitalists, they're not waiting for the private equity, they're just starting up. And this has really been seen in the cryptocurrencies of being accepted with PayPal and Stripe, because this whole ecosystem that with this decentralized money, which they had access to on their own and had easier access to, has actually seeped over to business. And so businesses are having to deal with that. The second piece that I see that has really changed for startups is this advancement of really leaning in. And I think, Mary hit on it, and so did Tony, this whole thought of boundless, timeless jobs and getting to the talent that you actually need to get to engage them. And so while many people, say, oh my gosh, this virtual environment is not so great, it's actually helped startups be more competitive in two ways, because they're able to get to talent and get to them and pay for them in the money that they're using, whether it's cryptocurrency or traditional backed dollars. And the other piece of it is being outside of the traditional funding. They don't have to hire the person with the Ivy League or the highest education. They could hire the person who has the skills and not worry about their funding being pulled. And so FinTech has stepped up with all their patents across the world around blockchain and dealing with this new ecosystem. And I think those three trends are going to have the biggest impact on global startups. And thank you guys for letting me come and share that.
Thank you. Thank you. That has been a great overview. Maybe now we'll try to tackle a more practical question for our business leaders. They always want to know, okay, now that we have a good understanding of the impact, how can we mitigate some of these issues with our teams? And specifically, I was hoping maybe each one of you can comment, how do you maintain your team culture? How do you maintain effective communication in this new global remote environment? And maybe even how you can redesign your way of evaluating teams and rewarding teams, because everything has changed. So maybe we'll start again with Nikhil, if you're able to share some of your experiences.
Yeah, so I think it's a very important question, Ingrid. Motivating team, because frankly speaking, when the lockdown happened in March, I was very happy. Because the kind of schedule we all live, 200 flights are domestic flights a year, many such flights abroad, it is absolutely crazy. So if somebody, I always joke, somebody has to send me a post, send me to a Delhi airport, most likely I'll get it rather than sending it home, because you are never at home. So I'm sure most of the business leader will agree to that. So I was extremely happy that when the lockdown happens, immediately I renewed my passport for Netflix, and I was thinking that, okay, for a few weeks at least this thing will go on and we'll watch all the movies which are pending. But that happiness was short-lived, because we suddenly got more busy than ever. One of the reasons, and the last, and I would say this goes on for 4 or 5 months, and then the work from home culture set up and the fatigue started, that why we are continuing with work from home. And that the fatigueness of working from home, working in front of a laptop, working continuously on Zoom, not able to meet the people, it started taking toll, not only your personal and professional life, but also started taking a toll on your environment. People started, I would say, started decreasing their performance. And I have seen that in my teams, and I manage an incubator which has close to 100 startups. And many such startups also share the same sentiments with me. So what we should do? So what we started doing is that when the lockdown was little eased up, so there were team members located in different places. So certainly it is not possible for us to go and work in the office for obvious reason. We started asking them to gather somewhere for a short period of time and have a chit chat. That has improved the confidence. People were started coming out, maybe go for a drive. 2 or 3 people can go for a drive, may not step out or go for the restaurant somewhere. So that has started the social cohesion once again. Absolutely working in the silos, working in a work from home environment, it will be very challenging. And in books and books, it is written in the human is a social animal. We like to see people. We like to feel people, not just see them. We like to feel people. The another initiative I was just writing, in fact, on the chat box, Israel was asking me, how many of you are attending virtually? So we have, as you know, we have one of the largest delegations in India for WBF, and we have a WhatsApp group among ourselves. And the lockdown conditions are not so severe in India. The cases load has significantly reduced for obvious reason. So we decided to meet in a real time, and we are all going offsite to go up where the at least Indian delegation can meet during that time. So we need to start working on a mix and match culture. Now in my office, I have sent a memo that once a week you should start coming to the office and do a staggered timing. And for the last few months, I was able to see that the performance of the employees have started going up again. They were more happy, they were more participative, and they were actually looking forward for a car ride, as simple as a car ride. Trust me. Oh, today I have to go for a car ride. I have to meet my office colleague somewhere. Just half an hour car ride or half an hour coffee in somewhere has started making a difference. Those things are very important. We need to start building up that cohesion again. We cannot put people in silos.
Thank you. Mary, would you comment also on team building and effective communication and redesigning competencies, maybe? Your experience?
Of course, and very much agree with what Nikhil said. Maybe just a few thoughts. I mean, the first priority, obviously, for business leaders and organizations has been to try to keep people healthy and safe, right? And that was the #1 priority. However, I think as we embarked in this whole pandemic, initially, a lot of leaders, a lot of individuals saw it as a sprint, right? And then we realized actually it's a marathon, and now we realize it's an ultra marathon. And so one of the things that's important is, of course, trying to do everything we can to keep people healthy and safe, but also focusing on well-being, right? And increasingly, the remote working has had the effect in some places and among some populations of very much being 24/7. There are no more boundaries. You feel like you're sleeping at the office, right? And in many cases, it leads to exhaustion and burnout and mental health. So I would say the first thing is keeping people not just healthy and safe, but also well, right? And caring for them holistically, including the mental health. The second thing, to your point, Ingrid, is yes, leaders need to be upskilled in how do you lead an organization in a remote environment? How do you manage performance? How do you become really clear on your strategic intent, on the role that people have, on what they need to achieve, on the outputs and the results that you expect, knowing that actually it's going to shift and you have to be agile and you have to be able to have that constant communication, that regular contact. I think there's another element around building your team, right? One of the reasons many companies were able to shift to remote working overnight is because they had invested in relationships and they built a culture and they had social capital. But the longer we spend working remotely, the more that erodes over time. And so it's really important to be intentional about setting time on culture and social capital and how do you build these relationships and how do you make sure that actually people understand how you get things done and what matters and what's important. And that brings me to maybe the other thing, which is the importance of purpose and meaning. And Tony touched on this, but I think there will be a before and an after to this crisis. And I think this crisis has helped to illustrate that actually purpose and meaning matter, and that people want to feel proud of how their organization showed up. They want to feel proud of how their leaders showed up in this crisis. And having that strong sense, that North Star, that strong sense of purpose and meaning is more important than it has ever been before. And that's something, again, where leaders need to really kind of step up and help articulate what is that North Star? What is our unique role and contribution to the world? So just a few thoughts. Happy to go into more detail later, but I don't want to take too much time.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
Oh my, I'm going to be the contrarian.
It's okay, that's good. That's why we have a panel.
I don't even know where to start because we polled 3,000 executives at the top companies. We weren't engaged with our employees when we were in the office. So we need to stop the myth that somehow virtual is the reason why we're not employed. And we need to stop the myth that every HR department is looking at every employee in a fluid workforce. We're not bringing people on for long-term careers. They're looking at them. Who do we buy? Who do we lease? And who do we bridge up? And so when we talk about engagement, HR and the board is having discussions about who do we need to engage, not that we need to engage everybody. And when we think about the engagement and what that word actually means, in the past, we had a contract as an employer to give value first to our employees. And that meant that you give your 100%, and because we're going to give you value in being a part of our culture. And if you stayed here 25 years, we had a ladder you can climb, you had a reward, and there was a true North Star for you to get to. But we don't have that anymore. And I think Accenture, calls it the liquid workforce. So we have to get back to, if we want to engage our teams at the most basic level, give value first, which goes to transformation. And what we can control is helping these employees. And I think Mary did touch on it. The leaders need to upskill so that they can upskill too and be of value to brand with, because whether you have that job in that corporation or outside that corporation, top leaders are going through digital transformation. And to Mary's point, when you are, whether it's virtual or in the office, they're leading that reskilling so that when the digital natives come and give them ideas, they can actually execute on those ideas because they have some knowledge base in order to take those ideas forward. And so my big takeaway is we need to stop the myth that there was an ever engagement that was great before the pandemic, because it wasn't good. Because when we change, it's hard to, put those guardrails back on and define what give value means. And that's what engagement is. Give value where people need it in an uncertain world and help them control what they can control. So the things they can't control, when they have to react to it, they have better tools in order to be somebody who could take a step up because they've reskilled and the company's done some of the, movement through the digital transformation, instead of jumping the Grand Canyon in this fluid workforce world where we truly are every day looking at which employees do we buy, which is your W-2, which employees do we hire through the lease economy, which is your gig, freelance, and consultants, and which employees are the ones that are worth our time, whether they're gig or perm, with the skills they have to spend the time and money to bring them up to what the company needs today, and maybe tomorrow, but at least to what the company needs today. So I would tell leaders, focus on reevaluating the contract and what give value first means for each of the employer and the employee in order to jumpstart engagement, whether you go back to the office or whether you keep your company virtual.
Thank you. Great. I love that we have a variety of opinions. That was the point where we have so many different guest speakers. The one other topic that I was hoping we can all address also is trust and transparency, because I think that has also emerged over the last few months, that it's so important to have that team trust, the leaders trust, transparency, and building that new culture maybe, or like you said, Tracy, redefining and like a renaissance of what trust and culture building means in this era. So maybe we can just touch a little bit to give our teams more hints on what they can do, given that we have this hybrid work environment or completely remote. Definitely it's not like we were before. Nikhil, do you want to start with this one?
What I would say that hybrid will work. at least for the foreseeable future, because there is a great sense of fear and uncertainty, both in the mind of the people as well as in the businesses. Hybrid does not mean that we won't go back to normal, because there is also a great resistance, there's underpinning, which is a great resistance. Mary talked about the vaccine, but across the world, what we are seeing, that there is a resistance among people to take up the vaccine. And I will not name anybody, but I spoke to several of my friends who are healthcare workers and senior doctors. They are not showing a confidence for various reasons. There are people are saying, okay, the adverse events are only 2% or 3% of the total vaccine taken, but they say, okay, you may be the one. The chances of you getting cured from coronavirus is higher than the actually, taking the vaccine. So people are a little scared about it. So that fear will fuel the sentiments for the more hybrid models. Now, hybrid model, how that will emerge, that will be very interesting to see, that whether it will be like a car ride, which I mentioned, or it will be a coffee discussion, or it will be once a day. I live in a place where it's next door to Delhi's place called Noida. Some of you have visited New Delhi, you will know. The place is called Gurgaon and Noida. They have the largest, some of the largest settlement of IT workforce. Unimaginable, many of my Westerner friends wonder how many people can work in a small place. So, for example, one office can host up to 5,000 IT workers. So they have very, very large settlement. Millions of people particularly from information technology, IT, ITS services, they work in these areas. The high-rise building which I stay, the reason I'm giving you these real examples is because that people can relate it to. The high-rise building which I stay, there are more people who have gone out of the building than coming in. One of the reasons is that the high cost of staying in a metropolis. The Gurgaon and Noida kind of places where we have beautiful offices of Google, Infosys, TCS, they're all empty. Nobody is there. You can drive through, even today, you can drive through, despite of there is no lockdown, you can drive through those places quite easily. People have left towns, the big towns, they have shifted to the smaller towns and they started working from there. So how do we manage this hybrid model? That will be, there is no answer. I don't have any answer to that now. Maybe what in IT services we used to call it as a near shore center. So rather than having a near shore from the actual location, you can create some smaller hybrid offices in towns where 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, 50 people are staying in those places, and create the network of these offices rather than having a big building where 5,000 people are working in one office. You create a network of offices, 50 people each in working in offices, and they interact with each other. So that could be a new model that will emerge.
Mary, can you comment maybe also on your perspective? Do we have already best practices for building remote culture, or is it too soon to even speak about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. And Ingrid, you asked about trust, and I think it's a really important question. And one of my beliefs is that actually it's leaders who create the culture, and it's leaders who create the context for individuals and teams and organizations to succeed and thrive, or not, right? Mm-hmm. And fundamental to that is, I believe, trust, right? And we all know that trust takes time to build, but it can be destroyed in seconds. And if you look at what it takes to build trust, I like to use the trust equation, which goes as follows. It says trust equals openness times reliability times expertise divided by self-orientation. And you need to have all of these, right? You need to have someone who's open and will be transparent with you, who's reliable, they do what they say, who has the expertise to do what it is you're asking them to do. And it's not about their own personal agenda, but it's about a shared agenda. And I think leaders have a critical role to play, first of all, in role modeling that, but also in creating the conditions in which there can be real trust and real psychological safety in organizations. So that means openness and transparency, right? And that's tough in a pandemic, and it's tough in a context where there's so much change and uncertainty. But it's about being really open about what you know, what you don't know, and what you're trying to do to learn more. And it's about also having that learning mindset in order to constantly find out. So openness and transparency. But it's also about reliability. It's about walking the talk. It's about having the courage of your convictions and to have that kind of reliability in how you deal with everybody. Of course, it's about expertise. And by the way, it's not just expertise, but it's also having that learning mindset, because the world is changing so fast. And so you have to be constantly learning. And that starts with the CEO and the top team, just as much as it does with the frontline workers. So having both the expertise, but also the mindset to constantly develop new and different expertise as the world continues to change. And then, of course, it's about self-orientation, right? And how do you not have self-orientation, which kind of destroys trust and limits and reduces trust, but actually a common purpose, a sense of meaning that is more important than just an individual agenda, a North Star that gives employees a reason to go to extraordinary effort in order to achieve an extraordinary mission. And so as I think about, trust, those are the things that I think are really important. And again, it goes back to leaders creating that context, creating that culture, creating that shared environment of trust. And yes, it is happening in places, not as often and not as much as I would like, but there's certainly examples of extraordinary leaders who've really stepped up during this pandemic situation and have seen their organizations do amazing things. I mean, one of the companies I work with, they literally shifted literally thousands and thousands of people overnight from one part of their business that had massively been impacted to another part of their business. So we are seeing some truly heroic acts of leadership, but it's not as widespread as it should be.
Absolutely. Mary, we have a few minutes left before the end of the panel, and then we'll take some questions. So I encourage all our attendees to submit some. Tracy, any comments on the best practices for this remote team building and trust and transparency and effective communication?
I just want to combine Mary's answer this time with her answer last time, because she, I think, said it best. Basically, tell people, as leaders, give them the vision, articulate that vision, and in real time do it. And if you don't know, say, we don't know, but we'll get back to you very quickly, because if you don't give them the vision of why they're coming into the office or why they're doing it virtually or what comes next, you let them create the vision. And as leaders, you want to give them a vision of what it can look like around the skills if you accomplish thing versus trying to fight against the vision that they've made in their head that may not be where you really wanted to go. So I think her whole point about knowing what the outcomes need to be, why you're doing stuff, build the trust, communicate, is all spot on. I totally agree with her last two answers. That's how you build trust.
Thank you. Wonderful. I can't believe we already finished half an hour. It went so fast. We got a lot of questions in the chat, and a few I got also in my personal box, but it seems that our audience would love to know a little bit more about how we can prepare the workforce for the future. So the rapid reskilling, adjusting to new business models, particularly in the face of automation that we're seeing and the digital transformation that we talked so much today about. So like Nikhil said, on the one hand, you need to deal with every day and survive today. But on the other hand, you can't absolutely not prepare your workforce to be prepared for the future, right? So can we maybe all share some thoughts on how to balance today with the reskilling and agile management that we must engage in for the future? Nikhil, maybe you take, we're going. I think you're still on mute, Nikhil, if you can unmute you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's a very valid question about the reskilling the workforce. When I started this discussion, I talked about there is no new normal, there is a normal. So certainly we will require new workforce, new understanding of businesses. There is certainly an opportunity to write new business books, because all the business models that we have read in the business schools in the last few years, they may not be valid. So maybe we have to request people like Mr. Philip Kotler to rethink about the 4 Ps, or maybe so those things have to be there. So regardless of the job that you are in, regardless of the work that you're doing, maybe you are in IT, you are in finance, you are in government, or you are anywhere, you have to start working on the how would you remain relevant for the next 6 months, or maybe for next 6 years. Because what I also think that this could be just the tip of the iceberg, what we are seeing. The changes what we have witnessed in the last 9 months, though they are unprecedented, but there are more changes are there in store. I'm not saying the new pandemic will come, but the new changes will actually sweep the carpet away from our feet. We are not ready yet. We are not equipped enough yet. There is a small euphoria, like we talked about meeting a colleague for a coffee. So that's a small happiness, small euphoria. Same way when the Dow Jones goes up or BSE Sensex goes up and you see your mutual fund shooting up, but that's a small euphoria. That's not the real picture. So we need to start thinking about the business and the challenges that we'll face. And accordingly, we have to start building up the skills. It could be management skills, it could be technical skills, maybe in artificial intelligence, I don't know. So every business has to list down the top 5 things they were doing, or I will use this term again, pre-COVID level. Pick up that paper, turn it apart, and rewrite what you want to do next. Top 5 schools, what you want to do it now. If I were you, if I'm running an organization, that I will do. This is my top 5 skill requirements. What I was doing in January last year, I will not use them, but I will come up with the 5 new ones. That should be the way to look at it, which we have to tackle immediately this year. Answer, I don't have it for the next year. Maybe we have to do a webinar again in January next year. We will have more answers and more ideas by then. But as of now, 2021, top 5 skills, write down on a piece of paper, share with your team, and get going.
Thank you. Mary?
So the McKinsey Global Institute, we've had a team of researchers and data scientists and economists actually looking at the shift in work and the nature of work over the last 5 to 10 years. And there are a few things that strike us, right? The first one is that 50% of all current work activity can be automated with technology available today. 50% of all current work activity. Now, interestingly though, only 10% of jobs have more than 90% of their work content that is automatable because they have already been automated, right? But actually, if you look at the activity underpinning jobs, half of it can be automated with technology available today. Now, that has huge implications, right? Now, obviously, it varies enormously from one geography to the next, from one sector to the next, from one job to the next, right? So there's some jobs like legislators and CEOs and psychiatrists, actually only a small part of the content can be automated. Although even there, we estimate about 20% of a CEO's job could be automated with technology available today. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have assembly line workers and stock clerks and travel agents and dental lab technicians, where a huge percentage can be automated. And we estimate about 60% of all jobs have at least 30% of their content that can be automatable with technology available today. Now, if you then go and dive deeper, what we see is that there's going to be a significant reduction in demand for physical and manual skills and for basic cognitive skills, right? Because that can actually be automated pretty easily. Anything that's repetitive, anything that's pretty basic, that's ripe for automation and disruption. However, what we also see is an increase in demand for higher cognitive skills, for social and emotional skills, negotiation, communication, influencing, engagement, and of course, for technological skills, right? So like literally a 56% increase in demand for technological skills over the next decade. Now, that's hugely important. But the other thing that I would just highlight is that as we step back, we also asked ourselves, well, what are some of the meta skills that have never been more important and that are absolutely critical? And top of that list is this lifelong learning growth mindset, right? In a world where change is the one thing that isn't changing, where the one thing you can predict with certainty is that the world is going to continue to be unpredictable, it is absolutely essential to have this notion of lifelong learning, because we know that our skills and capabilities have a shelf life that is getting shorter and shorter. They're getting obsolete faster and faster. And so you have to constantly be able to reinvent yourself, both at an individual level and as an institutional level. And so really kind of having that mindset of lifelong learning, that curiosity, that openness to the external world, and having that as core to your DNA, both as an individual, but also as an organization, is absolutely critical. So that's the number one meta skill. The other two meta skills are, perhaps not surprisingly, an ability to lead and navigate through change, and an ability to take initiative and be self-directed, right? And of course, I think what we are going to see is that businesses will need to reimagine where and how work gets done. And they will need to invest in their culture and in that lifelong learning mindset, and invest in on-the-job training, in redeployment, in upskilling, in reskilling. And we are seeing some examples of companies that are doing that, whether that's SAP in Europe or Walmart or Majid Al Futtaim in the Middle East. There's some really impressive and inspiring examples of companies that are doing that. There was a wonderful interview with the head of one of these institutions, and they had invested a huge amount in reskilling their workforce. And the journalist asked them, "Well, aren't you afraid that you're going to just spend all this money, reskill these people, and then they're going to leave?" And he responded, with the classic comment that, well, the only thing worse than investing in them and having them leave was not investing in them and having them stay. And so I do think that this whole area of how do we reskill and upskill is going to be critically important. But I also don't think that private sector on their own is going to be able to tackle it, given the magnitude of the challenge that we're facing. It's going to have to be an ecosystem with public sector, with labor and social organizations, with NGOs, with universities and vocational institutions. But I think this is one of the most important issues of our time.
Thank you. Tracy?
So I came off Wall Street, and I always believe in data and money and to follow the money. And so when you look at the reason why companies hire people is to help them solve a problem. And Gartner just released their HR labor study that shows only 1 in 3 skills are hired by all Fortune 1000. So when you look at the skills and we talk about reskilling and skilling, we have to look at an environment where people are not hiring the same skills. And so I think the concept of continuous learning has to be there, but it's intentional learning. So if we look at it from the corporate perspective, the leaders have to tell them, where's our company going, so that the curious who want to stay there and those who want to be employed within that company understand what the company's goals are, so that they're intentional with their learning and skilling and reskilling. And from a personal level, if you're curious and you have continuous learning, you have to be intentional about your learning and build a broad adjacencies, because the other piece of that study showed that you're seeing job descriptions that have 7 to 12 different skills that were never put together in the past. And if you look at LinkedIn, they've changed their back end. So if you have a skill that's a shortage, they will serve up people who are the easiest people to reskill if the employer hires them. So I think the continuous learning, the open minding, but also the intentional learning by the leaders who are asking people to learn, being clear what that looks like and what the goal is. And for personal learning is looking at the broader landscape and remembering that we're going into, as every panelist has said in the keynote, something that looks different. And so you're going to have a broader open mind about what you should be learning and be curious across a lot of different levels.
Thank you. And I think for the last one, I'm going to combine a few questions, because it seems everybody tries to understand what is the role of startups in this new dynamic, high risk, volatile environment. We have experts internationally who say startups are uniquely suited to manage this, because they're used to functioning in unstable conditions. But on the other hand, we also learn from numerous surveys, not only ours, that they're also the most vulnerable, because they do not have that much cash and they do not have that much runway, and they don't always have the other resources such as big organizations. So maybe we finish up with each one of you to share what is your personal opinion, professional opinion on, are the startups better suited for this environment? And if so, why? And if not, what can you recommend for them? Nikhil?
So I think what I have seen in the last few months is about the changes in consumption patterns, household consumptions, the factory consumptions, about the way that we consume digital content. So everything is changing. Uh, that opens up a new opportunities for coming up with a new kind of startups, uh, be in agri-tech, be in health tech, be in medical tech. New and new startups will emerge. Uh, I still remember in the March, April time, when the uncertainty was at the peak and the lockdown happened, we were struggling to find PPE kits, masks, ventilators. And it was said that in a country like India, where the population is very large, we require 500,000 ventilators immediately. But we were not having enough ventilators. And practically everybody in the world was not able to supply because they were not having themselves. So what do we do? So we were not, in fact, you were surprised to know at that time the N95 mask was available at the black market for $15. The PPE kit was available for $50. Today, in 9 months' time, and thanks to the startup ecosystem, very strong manufacturing, we have become the second largest PPE kit manufacturer and the producer in the world. Now there are hundreds of companies which are not only producing for the domestic market, but they are exporting. There are at least 10 ventilator companies which have produced outstanding ventilators and they are exporting. And these companies were not in existence before March. They were into different kind of businesses altogether. I will not say it's a sustainable business of producing ventilators or masks or sanitizers or PPE kits, but there are new consumption patterns which are emerging. So I think we need to keep a watch on those consumption patterns. When the startups comes to us and they ask us, what is a new trend? So there is always a trend. There is always a trend to even produce a T-shirt or a shoes or a cap or a anything you want to produce. There is a possibility of doing something. People ask me what is the next big startup idea. Few weeks back, I was doing a webinar. They say, what is the next biggest startup idea? I said the displacement of Facebook and displacement of Google is the next big startup idea. It's $1 trillion idea. I use iPhone. It's a $2 trillion idea to displace the iPhone. But can you do that? Who will do that? Whose team will do that? How much money it need? That are the questions which need to answer. And displacement will happen. There is no question about it. When they will happen, that's something we have to see. There will be low-hanging fruits which we can do the displacement and the change immediately. There will be a long-term perspective that will emerge in the future. So there is a scope in practically every sector if you look around, because the consumption patterns are changing, our needs are changing, our style of working, professional and personal lives are changing. That's something which we need to watch out for, and that's a problem we are able to solve. That's your next unicorn.
Thank you. Mary?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think this pandemic, one way of thinking about it is as an experiment, right? It's not an experiment we designed. It's certainly not an experiment we would have chosen, but it is an experiment that we can learn from. And one of the things I'm saying with a lot of organizations I work with, big and small, is that it is proving to be an unfreezing moment, right? And things that were previously thought impossible suddenly become, routine. It's extraordinary. And so, yes, to your question, I think there will be some big challenges for startups, but I also think there are going to be some great opportunities. Einstein had a wonderful phrase. He says, in the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity. And in some ways, I see startups as more able to capture those opportunities because they are hungry and typically smaller, and they have this learning mindset, and they're innovative, and they're agile, and they move fast. And I think in an environment in which, speed and agility is becoming so critical, not just to survive, but to succeed and thrive, startups will have a huge advantage, right? I think that in this new reality, it's not the largest or the most profitable organization that's going to succeed. It's the one that's fastest and most adaptable. And I think that's an enormous opportunity for startups.
Thank you. Tracy, final comments, and then we'll be ready to close our event.
I actually think this environment is a great environment for startups because we're seeing companies do everything as a service, outsource everything, and more things in the future are going to be done outside of the corporate traditional structure. And so for startups who lean into this fad that more work is done outside of the actual corporation than internally within their hierarchy, it's a huge win. And so what I'm seeing both from the corporate side and from the startup side is this movement where people are filling in the niches of things that are being moved outside of the company as a service. And I've seen a lot of success, particularly during this time, as people look at how do we cut costs, and your biggest costs are your perm employees and your offices. So this opportunity to lean into the startup community that is stepping up to this whole as a service model is a huge win. And that's what I'm seeing, in 2021 also.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I would like to, again, thank everybody, our keynote speaker, Tony, all of you that participated in our panel. We had so many pearls. I think I'm going to go watch it again and then maybe share a few of these on our social media channels. I would also like to encourage all our attendees, and all of you are welcome as well, to participate in our World Congress. We have in February a huge gathering virtually, safe. And we'll share a lot of good thoughts about entrepreneurship on a global scale then as well. Thank you again. I really appreciate your time, and I'm sure our attendees found it equally insightful. Now we're ready to close. Thank you.